Hey there, and welcome to the Horse Geeks podcast, where we look at horses and riders from the inside out. I'm Kirsten Nelsen, professional horse trainer. With me is Deb Romero, professional orthopedic massage therapist and Alexander technique instructor. Today's topic we are titling Actively Changing Towards Balance. And it's a little bit of a carry on from the last two podcasts where we looked at how unconscious our fear of mistakes can be that puts us in fear or a defensive state. And then how just change can be scary and learning can be difficult. And so how do we work through these uncomfortable emotional states? And there's a ton of professionals out there, and especially mental health professionals, that have lots of tools to help us deal with fear, with defensiveness, with, overcoming chronic problems. And I think what Deb and I wanted to talk about today are just simple tools, easy to remember, readily available, really super things that we can do when we find ourselves in a state of fear or defensiveness for any reason, which happens all day, every day. And these are just what we wanted to talk about was what are some easy to use tools to help us shift and actively change towards something more productive or better balance, rather than getting mired down in it. So with horses and riders, fear and defensive behavior comes up all the time. It's a prevalent part of the process. Change is prevalent in part of the process, and learning, which can be difficult. So fear is when we're actively shifting out of our rest and digest or parasympathetic nervous system and into the sympathetic nervous system of fight and flight. So there's a lot of physiological changes that happen with that, but the stimulus or the trigger to go into our fear-based instinctual nervous system or the sympathetic nervous system, it can be triggered mentally, emotionally, or physically. So there can be, and what triggers a horse is very different from what can trigger a human. But what's interesting is like Candace Pert, who wrote The Molecules of Emotion and did a lot of she did a ton of research that started with opiate receptors and started to help lay people understand what's happening in our bodies. It's a chemical reaction in our bodies when we experience what we call emotions, and thoughts can trigger those chemical reactions. But one of the most fascinating things I found about Candace Pert's work was she said the biochemistry that we experience, that we call emotions, is the most highly conserved part of evolution. So we can actually be biologically anthropomorphic in a way. When a horse feels fear, they're experiencing fear in the exact same way internally that we experience fear. What triggers the fear can be vastly different, but the actual experience of it is the same across the board with all mammals. So we can understand how unpleasant fear is for a horse or a riding student or an Alexander technique student, because we all experience that chemical chain of events the same way. And it's not very comfortable.
Right. Yeah. I like what you brought up about the parasympathetic. And it's important to remember that we're really, as an Alexander teacher, trying to bring up that subconscious awareness, because that fight or flight is a subconscious thing until it erodes and explodes. So can we do the thing before the thing happens? Can we be so aware that kind of like, preventing, be more proactive and setting ourselves up for success than trying to the snowball and trying to stop the snowball?
Right. And I would sort of delineate that fear, especially in the sympathetic nervous system, is a little bit different than what I would categorize as defensive behavior. I think defensive behavior is a little bit of a learned response to our environment or to things that trigger fear, that we kind of, it's like a precursor. When we become defensive, we're trying to avoid going into a fearful state.
And maybe that's a warning, that might be, and maybe there's even a signal before that.
Right.
Even further back, and we're not intuitively being aware of that happening.
And do you find that you recognize that when you're working with people, whether on the table or as a massage therapist or as an Alexander technique instructor? Do you recognize it in them, and how do you address it? Or is it something you would say just sort of comes up and people recognize it within themselves?
That is all of the above. I can usually notice if I have hands on, there's a level of tension. There's a level of resistance in the tissue.
Interesting. So
yeah,
physically in the quality of muscle.
right. And then I can usually, you can see that in an expression. It can be, horses do the same thing. They're going to express it in their bodies. And so people express it. And we can even name some, things like slouching or any postures that we see could definitely be telling us what's going on subconsciously.
Or even consciously that somebody's not verbalizing. Like, I think horses are super open. What you see is what you get for the most part. That's not always the case. But usually a horse lays it out there in front of you in their body language and their expression. But oftentimes I have to get people to pause and go, look, these are body language and energetic signs that the horse is feeling defensive or is in full-blown sympathetic nervous system. And that's where I've learned a really simple technique working with horses and riders. And this was so backwards from how I was trained with horses. It happened out of pure frustration the first couple of times and not knowing what to do. I just stopped everything. And I said, okay, this level of fear is getting dangerous to the horse and it's going to become dangerous to me. Can we just stop? Can you just be at the end of the lead line at halt and let me stand here in a safe distance and just regroup? And what shocked me was I needed a moment to pause and think and get out of the action reaction game. And just that break of activity, just stopping everything and going, okay, let me just gather my thoughts. What ended up happening for the horses, and this became very consistent to the point that it's become part of what I teach, is when that fear energy or defensive energy is escalating and the horse is demonstrating fight or flight behavior that can be unsafe, high level of energy, then just stopping the activity, but still remaining present with the horse, like not putting the horse away and go away for the day, but just stopping all the activity, allowed that emotion to sort of play through. And just,
I really like that. Yeah, because that is the key note of the Alexander technique, is the pause. I don't think there's any other practice that uses that there's a lot of sayings in the Alexander community, like just pause and the right thing will come along.
and so what does that mean? What do you do when you say pause? How does that work? When do you use it? What do you do in that moment?
The pause gives you permission to, like you said, regroup, or pause to acknowledge what's going on, pause to check in to see what's going on. I often, when I'm working with riders, even on the ground, it's like a half halt.
Yeah. It's a good way to put
It's
it.
like,
It's sort
just
of
half halt. just
mental
just
emotion.
half halt yourself.
Yes.
Just wait a minute. Because I think, and I know it's a tendency, it's an old habit of mine to push through things.
Yeah, and I think that's a temptation. Like
Yeah.
with horses as natural prey animals, they're more prone to be triggered into fear because they're a prey animal, right?
Right.
So it's a constant part of working with a horse that their fear button gets pushed, or they become defensive if they don't understand what we want in this nonverbal communication game we have. And then what can happen is, like, particularly if you have a horse that's showing aggression as a fight defensive pattern, what that really means, if the horse is snapping at you, biting you, trying to come through you, it's a fear-based behavior. But what it does is it triggers the fear in the human, and we often match fight with fight.
Oh, I'm guilty of that.
And so
it doesn't work.
no, you can bump your head against that wall a gazillion times. And when we come, if a horse invites us into a fight defensive pattern and we're triggered, we fight back. And some horses get very good at fighting, and they can become quite dangerous to people. But if we pause, like you're saying, what I discovered worked was, okay, we're at a safe distance from each other. Let's just stop until this sort of wash of emotion. And I feel emotion. I think horses do as well, and other people, as a physical sensation. So we call it feelings, and we describe emotions actually with kinesthetic words, which I find super fascinating.
That is like what words come up in your mind that,
like how laughter bubbles up, or we feel, how do I want to say, the heat of anger, right? Or
there you go.
Wave of grief, or we feel overwhelmed. We feel squished down by all the pressure, right? We feel like we have the weight on our shoulders. Like, all of those are actually physically descriptive sensations for an emotion. So that chemical that's released through our body, they say it only lasts 90 seconds. So I go, then why does it keep perpetuating? If the chemical response is done in 90 seconds, how is it that we can get stuck in anger or depression or flight or all those different defensive emotions? And that's because
I'm wondering if we just aren't realizing we're there.
it can become a habit.
Yeah, where it's ingrained that this is the response I have to A plus B equals C.
Yes.
Instead of saying or asking ourselves, well, how's that working for you?
Yeah. That's a bad question. How's that working for you?
Working for you today.
And I swear, horses give us private lessons. Like,
oh, no.
Horses as prey animals have survived for millions of years by sort of learning how to key in and frustrate predators. That's how they survive. So they're very good at frustrating humans and pushing our little emotional buttons, because that's part of an innate survival mechanism for the horse. So it comes up a lot between horses and riders, and just stopping, slowing things down, like, it can clarify communication, and it can also just allow that chemical change reaction of emotion and all the energy and thoughts that go with it to just, like, literally dissipate. I see it as sort of that emotion just evaporating out of the situation.
Do you find it's different? I was just thinking about this. Do you find it riders respond differently on the ground as opposed to when they're in the saddle?
Yes, very much so.
Yeah, I was just wondering about that because that kinesthetic connection when you're riding is very different than when you're working with a horse on the ground.
Yes. And for the most part, it is what we might expect, where people are more confident and more patient on the ground because their balance is not at issue. But that's not always the case. Some people have much higher levels of fear doing groundwork than they do riding. They feel more comfortable, more confident, maybe more in control when they're riding than they do with a horse on the ground.
And I think that's when the pause is important. It's important to recognize that it's happening. You can't stop it. You can't shut it off. It just comes up. And to acknowledge it, to pause and say, well, what simple tools do I have?
Right. And
to help me through this.
The way I've always taught people this, because it's a part of the training I work with. I call it developing the learning frame of mind, which basically in a nutshell just means if the horse is in the sympathetic nervous system, our first aim of training is to shift into the parasympathetic nervous system so that real learning and skill development can even occur. So, and it's the same I found for people, that if they're at a certain level of fear where they're shifting into the sympathetic nervous system, they literally can't hear what you're saying. And they can't really act with conscious control over their body because instinct is overriding everything. And
it's almost like they're in startle. It's the best way to look at it. Startle, lockdown is another good word, because once those muscles lock down, the proprioceptors, which send all the information, they shut off. So they're biomechanically, there is nothing that's going to move.
Exactly. Or it's going to be rigid in its movement and have too much pressure or not enough pressure, but the feel of it will change. So between horse and rider, one of the first goals, especially working in rehab or like behavioral rehab, especially, is getting the horse and rider to get out of the action reaction game of fight and flight. And I go, okay, the human is supposed to be the higher intelligence. We can use our words and our imagination. So somebody has to stop this cycle, right? And it's not going to be the horse. So the qualities, I go, if the horse is in the learning frame of mind and the rider, then just like fight and flight describe the behaviors or the quality of emotions related to being in the sympathetic nervous system, rest and digest describe the parasympathetic nervous system, right? So I tried to come up with qualities that were specific to what I was calling the learning frame of mind, which became calm, willing, attentive, and adaptable. And then I would say out of those 4 qualities, you have to get an A+ on all 4 at the same time, right? I go, ooh, there's the sticky bit, right? Because you can have a horse or a rider that's plenty calm. They are excessively calm, but they're unwilling to either try new things or change. And so I go, that's an imbalance that can describe a fight-based behavior. Or you have horses and riders that are trying their guts out, that are, I'll try this, I'll try that, I'll try this, I'll try that. They're plenty willing to try what you ask, but they're never calm. And I go, that describes a flight response or flight defensive behavior. So calm and willing in equal parts is sort of an observational quality that tells you, okay, either me or my student or the horse is now coming into the right nervous system. They're feeling safe and they're feeling less defensive, so we can begin the journey of learning or making changes.
Yeah, and I think sometimes that's what the teachers are there for, whether it's an Alexander teacher putting hands on you or you as an instructor. you need the observer to help you find all that.
Yes. Yes.
To know that this is what it, whatever, feels like, looks like, are we going into a danger zone? Are we not? Finding, the pendulum where it's a little bit level.
Yes. Or even 2020 with all the big changes that came down that year, that's continued into 2021. I found myself doing that same learning frame of mind work on myself for various reasons, where I just literally had to sort of sit there and do nothing and wait for these waves of overwhelming emotions to just pass, to just sort of become less and dissipate. And then I could think clearly. Or I would get out and go do some hard work and spend that physical energy. I got my whole fence line stained. I worked in my garden, painted my barn. It was like, I had to spend that energy to start to let it dissipate, to let the fear or the defensiveness dissipate until I would feel
and
better.
I think people express that differently. Like it might be a physical thing you need to do. Some people, it might be writing. It's not one thing that's going to help everybody.
Exactly.
You have to find what that is for you that day. Sometimes for me, it's rest. Sometimes for me, it's, wow, I just really need to go see an Alexander teacher and get some hands-on. Sometimes it's physical labor. So it's never one thing.
Yes.
That's a cure-all for me. So.
Well, exactly, because our needs change and they can change with the various emotions that we feel. So pausing is one thing, or if you're in that state of discomfort, cleaning the house, doing yard work, you might want to think about working with your horse, because your horse might pick up on all that negative emotion and it could go sideways. But you could say, oh, I'm just going to have a lunging day with my horse, or I'm going to do something easy and enjoyable with my horse. Or I'm going to go, take a walk the dog, clean the house, whatever. Because even with horses, some horses pausing and doing nothing allows them to shift out of that defensive state quicker. And other horses, I'll have them either in an enclosed area like a round pen or on a lunge line, but I won't ask anything of them. I'll just be there as a safety net and let them choose, walk, trot, canter, look around, do whatever they need to do to expel that excess energy that's tied up with these defensive thoughts and emotions.
I like that, the word ask and allow. I don't hear those words very often in the horse community.
Yeah, but it's one of those things that you can't make somebody feel safe. You can't make a horse feel safe. All you can do is create maybe an environment and offer support to allow that body, whether it's human or equine, to either move until the emotions dissipate or just be present and do nothing until the emotions dissipate.
That's an Alexander teacher in a nutshell.
So how does that come up in Alexander work?
And I imagine it's the same for you with horses. To me, it's always asking the questions instead of always giving answers. Does that make sense? So if I'm putting hands on somebody, am I trying to control what they're doing? Or am I actually listening to get information to maybe guide them in a direction of change?
So much different than if you were to give a massage where you're actually going in there and kind of working the muscles.
And I think that's a great comparison, and a lot of words come up around that. And in the Alexander community, we are teachers, and we have students, whereas as a massage therapist, I am doing something to them and they are our client.
Interesting.
Yeah, so that relationship between, and we had that podcast, I can't remember which one, about student, teacher, teacher, student. We can be changing roles constantly as Alexander teachers. But as a massage therapist, that's a different role. That's somebody's coming to me to have something done to them.
Yes. And I think even between horses and riders, a lot of times when the horse is acting out defensively, we call them behavioral problems, right? But what humans tend to look for is, what is the sort of formula or remedy to make the horse overcome this bad habit? And
that word overcome is pretty strong.
right. And what I realized was, any fear-based behavior, I used to have a list of 20 techniques to use for this behavior, that behavior, this behavior. And finally I go, all of this behavior, whether it's mild or moderate or even extreme and dangerous, is based in the emotion of fear. The horse is in the wrong nervous system. And so any amount of manipulation rarely has a long-term lasting effect on changing the horse. And some horses,
yes, an explosion may occur.
What?
An explosion may occur.
Yeah, you can make it a whole lot less safe for you and the horse before they ever figure out that it's okay. And that's sort of the premise behind what they call sacking out a horse or flooding a horse with something they're afraid of. I go, a lot of people get hurt in that situation, and some horses never overcome it. They just become more defensive. But if we think, like I said, Candace Pert really opened my eyes to go, the experience of different emotions is the same, whether it's experienced by our horse or by us. And so we can relate to that. We can recognize the body language and the behavior, and whether we're the teacher or the student of our horse, because that goes back and forth all the time. When our partner, friend, or loved one or horse is having an emotional meltdown and acting out, and they're stuck in that defensive behavior, we can be present but not have to fix it.
That's a really good point. I had 2 new horses move in, and the stress of moving, as you know, and the owner came to me and she said, you know, this is very stressful to me. If I snap at you, please don't take it personal. I said, I'm in the age group that I don't take too many things personal anymore. But I think with horses, I have to be very careful when I get certain feedback from my horse that I don't take it personal.
Yeah. And I don't think that whether it's a horse, a student, or a friend, or even I had to start learning to be gentle even with myself in my own head.
Oof.
That defensive behavior is not personal.
No, it's just a response.
It speaks to what's going on in the other individual. And I think we talked about before, one of the ways we can recognize that a horse or a student has completely shifted out of a fearful state 100% is when we see boredom. I go, boredom is the opposite of fear. We're ready to tackle some new challenge or do something new. And I would say the opposite of defensive behavior is kindness and compassion, because we have to feel pretty secure within ourselves before we can offer kindness and compassion to our horse. And I see it with horses, like horses that beat up other horses in the pasture are the more insecure defensive horses. So the lead horse of a herd is the one with the best plan, not the biggest badass. It's the one that's most balanced, right? So my anchor horses, when I have a new horse move in, I have certain horses that just are unflappable They don't buy into all that extra defensive emotion that the new horse is feeling. And they help me with new horses coming in the barn, settle in and adapt, because they don't feed that energy.
That's a really good point. We, another Alexander teacher and I got a grant to work in an elementary school. And we were waiting for the students, I think they were second graders, to come in. And they came in and it was total chaos. Just 30 kids running around. And the other Alexander teacher and I, we sat there, we waited, 30 seconds went by, nothing stopped. So we decided to roll out our yoga mats and do some constructive rest. We're like, I'm not feeding into that. I'm not going. And it took about another 30 seconds to a minute that the kids, without us saying anything, just inhibiting, reacting, taking care of ourselves, being calm, they all found their mats and lie down. And we did that for about 5 minutes and the room was totally silent.
Wow.
Yeah.
No, and that's what I found with horses. One of the keys to like a high energy, easily distracted horse in the flight defensive pattern can't pay attention to just one thing. They're like those little kids having bounced around everywhere.
Butterflies and
right. Or the horse going down the trail sees the tree that fell over and blows a gasket, right? And so what we're taught as riders is to like push the horse towards what they're afraid of to get them over it. And I'm like, how's that working for you?
we do it with people too.
Exactly.
Push through it.
Just like little kids, one of my secret tools to help a horse like that calm down is to ask the horse to be attentive just to me. So if I stay in a calm state, I can on the ground sort of get the horse to face me and not look at what it's afraid of. Or if I'm riding and the horse looks to the right with a high head and a lot of energy, I can decide to suddenly make a left turn. And just like teenagers or toddlers, out of sight, out of mind. So as soon as you turn them away from what's creating that anxiety, defensiveness, that reaction, it helps them shift out of that state emotionally, because you mentally got their mind off of it. And I went, I should do that to myself more often.
Redirect.
Starting to feel insecure, go find something else to do. Right?
Yeah.
Or too much energy, I don't know what to do with. My house is now immaculate, right? Or my garden looks great.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think if as a self-check for me, pausing was one of the simplest things I could do to not feed and escalate fear or even defensive behavior. And then recognizing if I don't feel bored, maybe I'm in some state of defensiveness or fear. That could be it. Or maybe I just need new challenges. That could be it. But if I also lose my patience and become unkind, judgmental, authoritarian over my horse, I'm the boss, you have to do it because I feed you. All of that is insecurity that comes out sideways as a need to control someone else. And I go, we see that every day these days in our world. And I go, it speaks to this high level of insecurity that we're feeling as humans. With all of these big changes going on in our world, I think everybody feels insecure. And
and we tend to reach out in a sense of, if I can control what's out there, I'll be okay. Instead of, I really need to control what's going on here, and that can do whatever it needs to do to right itself.
Yes, because you see online all the time of feeding that fear and feeding that defensive behavior.
Mhm.
And I have to say, there's a whole contingency of people online who are actually putting out kindness and
There
hate.
are.
And I
I
go,
agree.
that's what I try to follow. That's what I try to fuel and feed. Because I think it was the Dalai Lama who said, whenever possible, be kind.
Yes,
And kindness is always possible.
I like that.
Always possible. And I think that's a little self-check I use in a moment, because we all get triggered. We all go into that
Mhm.
defensive or fearful state before we know it hit us. And we don't always know why we feel that way. But we can take a pause. We can redirect. We can go do something else to spend excess energy. And we can check ourselves going, is this the kindest way I could say what I need to say? Or instead of judging somebody else, if we were in their shoes, we might feel and behave the same way. So maybe we could show a little compassion, even if we don't understand why the horse is doing what they're doing. That will, the space we open by pausing and not feeding defensive energy with our horse is the solutions, and the understanding can bubble up to our conscious awareness. We make
Yeah, and I like that because I know those things come up for me. And if those questions are popping up, why is the horse responding this way?
Mhm.
That's my first cue to, okay, pause, take a half halt,
Right.
listen, check in with myself. And then things seem to just evolve into what they need to.
Right. Because we open the space in our mind that there might be something we could change that would either make the communication clearer,
Mhm.
or maybe we need a firmer boundary than what we've been giving. Maybe we need a gentler boundary. Maybe we need to just allow the horse to express whatever they're feeling for a few minutes and then try it again. Right. So there's lots of ways to deal with things as they get tense. But if we don't pause long enough to rethink what's happening, then we're sort of jumping into that instinctual prey-predator confrontation between us and the horse, or with other humans, predator-predator confrontation.
Yeah. I mean, if everybody would just learn how to practice pausing, I wonder what the world would be like.
Yeah, as a natural chestnut mare, patience and pausing did not come easy. That did not come easy. Ironically, learning to slow down and be patient and be kind and be compassionate to the horse, ironically, was the fastest way to get real results with a horse. And
I agree with people too.
Hammered that into my head over and over until I got it. They figure out our weakness and they will repeat that private lesson until you change.
Don't you hear me? You're listening.
Same lesson over again. But I think that's what's so rewarding about working with horses is we have to evolve beyond our instinct to have a functional, productive relationship with a 1,000-pound prey animal. So the horse has to be out of instinct to successfully work with a human. And we as humans have to be out of our instinct to successfully work with.
Oh, I like that. I like the way you put that. Yeah, because we're coming from different sides of the fence, that's for sure.
Yes. And what makes sense to a prey animal is completely 180 degrees opposite to what makes sense to a predatory species. And that's the way it's meant to be. Otherwise, there would be no more prey animals and the predators would rule. So prey animals have a very different intelligence when it comes to protecting themselves. And we don't always understand it. But to really learn to help our horse overcome instinct and for us to overcome instinct, that relationship of opposite psychologies is tough, but really rewarding. And they teach us to be better people.
I agree.
Yeah. So I think, and I just wanted to reiterate sort of the strategy I use in training, whether it's for the horse or the rider, I call the learning frame of mind, which means at the same moment, you have to have an A+ on calm, willing to try. Doesn't have to be perfect, just willing to try. Attentive to each other rather than everything else. And then the adaptable part means all the time, not sometimes, no excuses. In every situation you can imagine, that's the calm, willing, and attentive is achievable. And then the main strategies I use to deal with excessive emotion is either pause and do nothing, or you're not really working, even if the horse is running around on the end of the lunge line or the rider is going through the motions, you're just letting that excessive energy release in order to begin learning.
Yeah, in a safe and comfortable environment. I think
Yes.
that's important. That, and I see that, you know, as a body worker, as an Alexander teacher, the environment has to be safe, comfortable, and trusting
Absolutely.
for it to work. Or, you know, I've had people totally tell me things and they look at me and they go, I have no idea why I just shared that with you. So that's when you know that person was in a safe, comfortable space to share something that they've maybe never shared with anybody else.
Exactly. Or a lot of riders go through lessons where they're being yelled at by the instructor. And I go, that can create a lot of stress and shut down learning. So I go, learning to be patient with an individual student's unique process of learning. I go, I can't have any judgment over that, making in my mind thinking that they're super smart or super stupid. I go, I have to just approach it with kindness and compassion and non-judgment and go, I don't know how you're going to learn, but I'm here to help you understand some new concepts so that you can be more successful with your horse.
And I think one of the key words you mentioned is process. There is no end. There's no, it's always a process.
There's certainly no end to the emotions we feel or the emotions the horse feels.
And what response you used yesterday may not be appropriate the next time it happens. So that adaptability is really important for the human too, to say, well, what else? You know, I'm curious, what else would help you?
And that could be part of redirection, that when one strategy is not working, that the redirection is a little bit like throwing spaghetti against the wall. You just, well, why don't I try it this way? Or maybe I could change that. Maybe I could change this, and maybe get some momentum going back towards the direction of feeling equanimity.
I like that.
Equanimity.
Yeah. Equanimity.
So yeah, I think that covers everything of what I wanted to talk about. Did you want to add anything?
Nope, it sounds good.
The pause. Okay.
The pause.
Again, just to
practice the pause.
Practice the pause. And we know when we're there. We know if we pause long enough, if we catch ourselves in the middle of a screaming match with somebody, or getting harder and harder on our horse, or even thinking, wow, my horse is really a dummy. It's like, those are the kind of thoughts where maybe we need to take a pause and go, what's really going on here? What's the mental emotional state underneath the actions?
Yeah.
And when we look at that mental emotional state, sometimes that explains the actions. Oh, this horse is just feeling defensive and protective against me. Wow, how could I change that?
I agree.
And sometimes the horse will have its own issues, its own habits, its own learned behaviors. But if we're in control of our own calm, attentive, willing, and adaptable state, then we know we didn't contribute to it, and that we're there to help the horse move through it.
Yeah, it's kind of like that example I gave with the kids in the classroom. not to play into that, but pause, kind of step back.
Right.
And redirect.
The energy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what a lead horse actually does. And I watched my cat do the same thing when I got a new cat who was bouncing all over the place and highly defensive when she first moved here. My other cat would just sit near her. And if she tried to attack him, he would swat her. But otherwise, he never attacked her, but he wouldn't go away. And I went, that is so powerful, because she ended up getting calmer and calmer and calmer, because she came in because she doesn't get along with other cats. And my original cat was pretty laid back, and he wouldn't let her beat him up, but he also wouldn't attack her. And I go, that's actually a well-balanced mental emotional state in an animal. Is that and I watched an old horse of mine I used to have years ago. I would get a really worried horse in training, and the lead horse, who was also physically the weakest horse in the herd. He was old and he was physically challenged, but his presence made everybody else calmer. And if I got in a new horse, I had one new horse once that was so defensive. And every day I put her in the pasture with him and another horse. And this horse would run to the corner and stand there all day and wouldn't move. And every day I watched this horse of mine move closer and hang out. And then the next day, a little bit closer and just hang out and do nothing. And until that really scared horse, just sort of all that emotion dissipated, and she was able to start to approach the other horses even and relax a little bit. But my horse never fueled that energy. He just went and stayed near her and helped her dissipate that energy, which I thought was amazing. Like, to watch it happen with animals, you go, maybe they have some intelligent ways of doing things that we don't.
We could tap into that.
We could use that. We could learn from that. Absolutely. All right. So we will wrap it up for this podcast. And again, if you want to follow the Horse Geeks podcast, you can hit the subscribe button. We're on YouTube. Your comments are welcome. And if there's anything you'd like to hear us discuss or talk about, feel free to leave it in a comment. And until next time, you guys, take care and be kind.
Bye.
Bye.